She was kicked off the plane while everyone watched in silence. But just 7 minutes later, the entire terminal fell into stunned quiet as cameras captured the truth. She owned the airline. It was a packed Saturday afternoon at Denver International Airport, and Gate C-27 was buzzing with the usual hum of travelers preparing for SunGlide Airlines Flight 218 to Seattle. Families juggled luggage, business travelers clutched coffee cups and briefcases, and overhead announcements echoed over the din. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until a young black woman stepped confidently into the first-class cabin. Kendall Brooks, 19, boarded the plane wearing a black hoodie, clean sneakers, and a quiet confidence that didn't scream wealth. But neither did it ask for permission. Her braids were neatly done, her headphones hung loosely around her neck, and she carried a worn leather backpack slung over one shoulder. She didn't look around nervously, like someone unsure of her place. She just found seat 3A in the first-class cabin, double-checked her boarding pass, and sat down. She pulled out her phone, opened the Notes app, and began typing. A few rows away, flight attendant Laura Chapman, 42, sharply dressed with a crisp bun and a colder tone, watched her. Laura had worked for SunGlide Airlines for almost 2 decades. She knew the look of first-class passengers, or so she thought. The moment her eyes landed on Kendall, something shifted in her posture. She adjusted her scarf, grabbed the manifest, and approached with rehearsed authority. "Excuse me," she said curtly, her smile thin and performative. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Kendall looked up calmly and handed over her boarding pass without hesitation. Laura barely glanced before stiffening. "This is first class," she said flatly, almost as if reciting a warning. "Yes, I'm aware," Kendall replied, voice soft but steady. "3A." Laura looked again, then scoffed subtly. "This must be a mistake. You'll need to come with me." Kendall blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, is there a problem with my ticket?" she asked, still composed. Laura didn't answer. She signaled another crew member and muttered something under her breath before turning back to Kendall with an edge in her voice. "You'll need to step off the plane while we sort this out." Whispers were beginning to spread around the cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances, while others looked away, suddenly fascinated by the contents of their phones. Kendall stood up slowly, collected her backpack, and followed Laura toward the front of the plane. She wasn't escorted like a threat. No handcuffs, no shouting, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, her expression remained calm. No tears. No protests. She simply pulled out her phone, opened a secure messaging app, and typed a single line. "Activate Plan B. Media team, stand by." Then she hit send. Back on the plane, Laura returned to the cabin with a look of professional satisfaction, telling a colleague, "Problem taken care of." The rest of the passengers seemed to collectively exhale and go back to their routines, not realizing that what had just happened was about to become national news. In less than 7 minutes, someone would recognize Kendall on the concourse. Not from the flight, from a magazine cover, from a corporate press release, from Forbes. And by then, Laura's world, along with the airline's reputation, would already be unraveling. Within minutes of Kendall being escorted off the plane, a passenger in 4C uploaded a shaky 27-second video to social media. The clip showed Kendall calmly handing over her boarding pass, asking a simple question, and being silently ushered off the aircraft. There were no outbursts, no raised voices, just a quiet tension that lingered in the air. The caption read, "Why was this black girl kicked out of first class when her ticket was valid? SunGlide Airlines, care to explain?" The video began to gain traction immediately. On Twitter, it sparked debate. On Instagram, it hit explore pages. On TikTok, it was remixed with commentary and reaction videos. Inside Denver International Airport, Kendall sat alone near Gate C-34, legs crossed, elbows resting on her backpack. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't doom-scrolling. She was calling the executive office. "This is Kendall, trigger internal comms," she said calmly. "Let the board know I want a full meeting within the hour. Also, have PR draft a controlled statement. We're about to trend." Her tone was firm, measured, like someone used to managing crisis, not creating it. Meanwhile, back on board Flight 218, Laura Chapman moved through the aisle with the composed efficiency of a seasoned flight attendant. She handed out sparkling water and pre-flight towels, her expression unreadable. In the galley, she smirked as she recounted the incident to a junior crew member. She was clearly in the wrong seat, she said with a light laugh. Didn't even look like she belonged in business class. These things happen. The junior nodded awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Laura leaned against the counter, sipping from a water bottle. Kids today, she added dismissively. But despite her outer confidence, a quiet unease had begun to settle. A couple of passengers were whispering and glancing at her. A man in seat 2A looked up from his laptop and subtly began recording. A teenage girl across the aisle was typing furiously on her phone, likely live tweeting the entire thing. Laura caught bits and pieces. Unfair, racial profiling, this is going viral, and felt a twinge of discomfort in her chest, though she quickly buried it beneath years of practiced detachment. The loudspeaker overhead crackled to life. Attention, flight attendant Laura Chapman, please report to the airline's operations office immediately, the voice announced clearly. Heads turned. Laura froze for half a second before regaining composure. It's probably nothing, she muttered to her co-worker with a forced smile. Just a scheduling thing. But her shoulders stiffened and her hands tightened around the edge of the beverage cart as she wheeled it back into the galley. Something had shifted, and she could feel it, subtle, like the way air pressure changes before a storm. As she stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, a ground supervisor was already waiting for her with a tablet in hand and a grim expression. "We need to speak with you immediately," he said, privately. Laura's face blanched slightly, though she nodded and followed him without protest. Meanwhile, in the terminal, Kendall closed her phone and stood up. She adjusted her hoodie, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and began walking toward the executive wing of the airport. The video had just hit 1 million views. The hashtag #Kendall Brooks was trending nationwide, and Laura Chapman was about to find out exactly who she had removed from seat 3A. Laura was led down a quiet hallway deep inside the SunGlide Airlines corporate suite within the airport, where thick glass walls and leather seating gave the space a cold, executive polish. She wasn't told why she'd been called, just that she needed to answer a few questions. When the conference room door opened, she stepped inside and froze. At the long table sat 3 senior airline executives, including the company's COO, Richard Linwood. But what stopped Laura cold was the sight of Kendall, no longer in a hoodie, but in a fitted navy blazer, standing at the far end of the room beside a legal advisor. Her posture was upright, her expression unreadable, but there was a commanding stillness about her that made Laura's stomach turn. For a moment, Laura stood in stunned silence, confused. Before she could speak, Richard cleared his throat. "Laura, thank you for coming," he said, his voice calm but clipped. "You're here regarding the incident on Flight 218. Laura opened her mouth to defend herself, but Richard continued. "Before you say anything, there's something you should know." He turned to Kendall and gestured slightly. "This is Kendall Brooks. She is the daughter of our late founder, Charles Brooks. And following his passing, she became a majority shareholder in the company. As of last quarter, she officially joined our board as its youngest ever executive member." The words hit Laura like a slap. Her eyes darted to Kendall, whose gaze remained fixed on her. Not gloating, not angry, just piercingly clear. The air in the room tightened. Laura stammered, I didn't know." "She never said—" "She didn't have to," Richard replied. "Her ticket was valid. Her presence didn't need to be justified. You made it an issue." Kendall stepped forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "I don't need a title to deserve respect," she said, "and I never needed to sit in first class. I just needed to be treated like a human being." A quiet beat followed, tense, electrified. At that moment, the door opened again, and a member of the corporate communications team stepped in to whisper something to one of the executives. "It's everywhere," the executive said. "The footage, the story, her identity, it's viral. We're getting media requests by the minute." Laura turned pale. Her legs felt unsteady. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Outside the conference room, several journalists had gathered, tipped off by anonymous insiders and now hungry for confirmation. Camera crews were setting up. Flashbulbs blinked through the glass wall as Kendall turned slightly toward the window. One reporter shouted a question through the glass. "Miss Brooks, how do you respond to being kicked off your own airline's plane?" Kendall didn't raise her voice. She didn't step forward for drama. She simply turned, looked at Laura for one quiet moment, and then replied loud enough for the room and the cameras to hear. "I never needed special treatment, just fairness. And maybe now we'll start building a culture that understands the difference." The quote exploded online within minutes, used as captions, headlines, TikTok sound bites. It wasn't just a viral moment, it was a reckoning. Laura stood frozen in place, watching the ripple effect of her decision unfold in real time. And for the first time since stepping on that plane, she realized this wasn't about a seat. It was about what her assumptions had cost her, and what Kendall's dignity had just won. The fallout was swift and public. Laura Chapman was placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full internal investigation into allegations of racial profiling and customer mistreatment. The airline's executive team issued a formal apology within hours, acknowledging the incident and affirming their commitment to accountability. Passengers from Flight 218 began sharing their first-hand accounts online, with many describing Kendall's calm and respectful demeanor and contrasting it with the dismissiveness of the crew. Videos of the moment Kendall revealed her identity as an executive at the airline were reposted across platforms, accompanied by hashtags like #FlyFair and #KendallSpeaks. The press flooded her with interview requests, but Kendall took her time. When she finally addressed the public on the steps outside SunGlide's headquarters the next morning, she didn't make the story about herself. Dressed simply, she stood behind the podium and said, "This isn't just about me. It's about every young black traveler who's been questioned. Every single person who's been judged by how they look instead of what they've earned. My story just happened to be caught on camera, but it belongs to millions." The message resonated far beyond the terminal walls. Her words became a call to action, and she used her influence to ensure it wasn't just talk. Kendall proposed a sweeping reform package inside the company: mandatory implicit bias and diversity training for all frontline employees, annual ethics certifications for all staff, and a confidential customer feedback program that allowed anonymous reporting of misconduct without fear of retaliation. Respect should never be optional, she told the board in a closed-door session, and accountability should never be rare. To reinforce the changes, Kendall partnered with an outside civil rights consultancy to conduct a full audit of SunGlide's hiring, training, and customer service practices. The company announced its new policy shifts in a high-profile press release just 48 hours after the incident, crediting Kendall as both a catalyst and a leader in shaping the next chapter of their brand. Public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Customers praised the transparency and applauded the speed of reform. Internally, however, the mood was more complex. Some employees bristled at the scrutiny, while others quietly expressed relief that long unspoken tensions were finally being addressed. Kendall remained focused. She wasn't interested in punishment alone, she wanted transformation. Laura, meanwhile, waited quietly at home for the results of the investigation, no longer certain that her years of seniority would shield her from consequences. She had become the face of a mistake, but Kendall was determined to make the story one of growth, not just guilt. As one of the reporters later wrote, what began as an act of casual prejudice ended as a blueprint for progress. And that, in the eyes of many, was the real win. The final moment that sealed the story into public memory came when Kendall stepped out of the boardroom wearing a crisp white blouse under a tailored navy blazer, the newly polished vice chairwoman pin gleaming just below her left collarbone. As reporters clustered outside the building, flashes popped and microphones extended toward her. She didn't rush. She paused at the top of the steps, offering the slightest smile. Calm, deliberate, and grounded in something deeper than vindication. One reporter shouted above the others, "Miss Brooks, any final thoughts on what happened?" Kendall looked directly into the camera, voice steady but warm. "We're not here to destroy anyone," she said, "but if you're going to represent this airline, you better know how to take off with dignity and land with kindness." The clip went viral within the hour. News outlets ran it on a loop. Influencers quoted it. Corporate leaders took notes. But it wasn't just the elegance of her delivery. or the quiet authority she carried. It was the undeniable truth embedded in every word. In a world where outrage is often met with more outrage, Kendall's approach stood out. Calm, disciplined, but unshakably firm. Her poise didn't weaken her message, it sharpened it. She had never raised her voice, never played the victim, and yet she had turned an everyday moment of casual bias into a turning point for an entire industry. The story was no longer just about a seat on a plane. It had become a national conversation about the assumptions people make, the systems that allow those assumptions to go unchecked, and the power of those who dare to push back. Discrimination doesn't always scream. It often whispers. It arrives not in insults, but in glances, in questions like, "Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" Or in the quiet denial of space. Kendall's experience speaks to a truth many Americans face daily, that respect is still too often distributed based on appearance, not merit. But the lesson she leaves behind is clear. Respect should never be conditional. It shouldn't be offered based on your wardrobe, your age, or the color of your skin. It should be the default. In a country built on ideals of fairness and equality, we still struggle with the biases that sit just beneath the surface. Kendall's story isn't powerful because she had authority. It's powerful because she didn't use it to humiliate, she used it to educate. And that choice made all the difference. Her calm dismantling of a deeply ingrained mindset reminds us that real strength doesn't roar. It endures. Her approach didn't involve revenge or retaliation. It focused on restructuring a culture that desperately needed change. This wasn't just a win for her, it was a signal to every quiet professional, every underestimated young person, every person of color who has ever been told, "You don't belong here." She proved that you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stand, stay grounded, and let the truth do the talking. In the end, Kendall didn't just change a policy. She changed her perspective, and that, more than anything, is what makes this story one that people won't forget. Because long after the cameras stop flashing, her words and what they represent will keep flying. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of the quiet strength that lives in all of us, don't just scroll away. At X Daily Stories, we bring you real, powerful, and thought-provoking narratives that reflect the struggles, courage, and triumphs of everyday people who stand up when it matters most. Hit the like button if you believe dignity is non-negotiable. Comment below if you've ever witnessed or experienced something similar. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, because sometimes the smallest moment can spark the biggest change. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.